We're officially mid-season on One Step Beyond Cyber, and today's episode is a standout. Now, I'm going to be joined by Jim Peterson, a former MSP founder, and now the product marketing manager for ConnectWise. Now, you're going to walk away from today's episode with practical takeaways, whether you're a business leader or an IT manager, someone just trying to figure out where their next cybersecurity investment should go. All right, so let's jump in. Welcome, Jim. Hope you're doing great today.
Hey, Scott. Nice to see you here on the platform.
Yeah.
Excited to have a conversation.
Yeah, it was nice to meet you, and we did our discussions, and I was really excited to hear what you had to say on some of these topics. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive in. But so just so our audience gets a little knowledge of who you are and what you're about and what drives you and things like that. Could you share that with our audience?
Absolutely. So Jim Peterson, I'm a product marketing manager from ConnectWise, which really means my whole goal is to take cybersecurity products and try to position them with messaging that resonates with the risks we have. So from endpoint defense to recovery to everything in between there. You know, I've been in the IT space, cybersecurity space for a little over 25 years now. Most of that time has been actively protecting businesses with my MSP and internal IT. Now I get to be on the other side of that and just help people understand what the risks are and how they can solve them.
Excellent. Yeah, that's awesome. So, so you mentioned when we last met that you're really focused on cybersecurity and specifically as it relates to small and medium-sized businesses. Can you unpack that a little bit and what this space really looks like?
Yeah, it's an interesting area right now because we're starting to catch up. But for a long time, the SMB community was pretty vulnerable to a lot of the attacks that are out there. You know, the concern that maybe they weren't really a target, or they didn't have data that was important, or that, the cost wouldn't affect them. Just kind of that mindset was there because they weren't seeing the traction on the ground of a lot of cyber attacks. And on top of that, cybersecurity is complex. There's a lot of different layers to it. We call it a stack for a reason. We might go into that in a few minutes, but we try to simplify this conversation because we know that SMBs are 52% of incidents and breaches that are out there. It's a pretty large number when you think about the total amount of incidents and breaches that go on a daily basis. So we try to really break that down into a simple conversation. When I'm talking about cybersecurity, I say, hey, 3 levels, right? How do we keep bad actors out so we protect from external attacks? How do we keep good data in and usable? Kind of that insider threat. If a bad actor were to get in, or if it were to start within it inside, how do we protect that? And then can we recover? Can we recover effectively? Because Scott, I'm sure you've seen this many times. We think we can recover, but when that bad data or bad day happens, the backups don't work like we expect them to.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we're going to dive into that here in this conversation. If I could have $1 for every business owner that I spoke to in my career that says, oh, I don't have anything that hackers would want. So have you heard that before?
100 times, more than 100 times. That's probably really lowballing it. But yeah, I think people underestimate the importance of their information in daily operations, just how they work, how they reference that material, and then some of the sensitive nature of it. I may not have patents or intellectual property that I have to worry about, but I could have employee personnel information. I could have sensitive client information, or even down to pricing that I really don't want to get out to the rest of the world.
100%. Yeah. And so, and I also, I kind of find that, smaller business owners tend to have that viewpoint, and they think that the threat actors are actually targeting or not targeting them, when today, of course, large retailers or government agencies that the threat actors are specifically attacking. But most of the time, these threat actors are just throwing out very large nets and seeing what they can catch, just like the fishermen out there. They just, we got some minnows in here, we got to throw them back in. That's fine, but more times than not, they're going to see what they have or don't have and how they can financially turn that into a financial reward for them, right?
Oh, you're hitting it. And, like if we even looked at 5 years ago, the amount of data that the threat community has on us is massive. We'd be surprised and probably a little scared if we knew. Things like matching email addresses to first names, that's super easy in today's world with a little bit of AI and programming and automation. So that really does bring up some of these statistics that we talk about. If we look back even 2 years ago, on average, there were 400 password attacks per second in the Microsoft environment. That's a lot. That's a lot. Last year, it went from 400 to 4,000. This year, it went from 4,000 to 7,000. So just the sheer volume of attacks that happen, the information they can hold, the attempts that they can make. Now, luckily, a lot of those don't work, right? So we're in a good shape. Most people have multi-factor authentication and all that good stuff. But at the end of the day, we can just see that arc of the volume of attacks, knowing they have more information. They're just getting really good at it. So it's that wide net. Eventually, someone will fall through it, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it can actually be educated people. I know we're a little off topic here, but it can actually be people that know better, but they just catch them at the exact right moment where the phone's ringing, they're finishing an email, and somebody's standing at their door, and they've got 10 other things on their mind, and they look at their computer and it looks legit, and they click on it and it's done, right? So, just like the art of illusion and magicians, look here, not here. The threat actors are making these attacks look so real nowadays.
100%. And I get tired. I want to go on vacation. I have a lot of things on my mind sometimes. And it's just that one little distraction, because emails are perfect in today's world. The AI helps those bad actors write clear, concise, urgent, compelling, copy basically in those emails. They're good. Yeah, you're right.
Really, really good. Great. So, that was great. And so let's just kind of roll forward and let's just say something, kind of a worst case scenario occurs and a breach occurs and the business isn't like fully protected. How would you approach that, or what are some comments you have on something like that?
Yeah. So when a breach occurs, and just like and you probably have talked about this many times, but we use the term incidents and breaches a lot. An incident is an attack that bypasses a layer of technology, requires us to remediate that, but they didn't get to the data. A breach means they got to the data, right? They copied it, deleted it, encrypted it, destroyed, did something to that information to make it susceptible or vulnerable. And what we find when that happens, right? A couple of things are our instincts that we typically respond to. First is we try to fix it as fast as possible because we think that it's going to minimize the impact. So a lot of times without a real great plan, business continuity, disaster recovery plan, we can do the wrong things. The flip side of that is we know 97% of the time when a breach happens, those bad actors also attack the backup systems. They know if they can make those backups unavailable, you are much more likely to pay that ransom or that extortion. So with those kind of two things combined, right, we have a really worst case scenario for a lot of businesses. Their data's gone. They maybe have taken the wrong steps to recover and deleted forensic evidence, things that we're going to use to try and determine what happened. And then they find out, oh no, my backups don't work like they're supposed to work.
Yeah, and there's this false sense of security I see where they'll say it's all in the cloud now. I don't have it on my local computers or servers anymore. So I'm backed up and I'm protected, right? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's it. That's one of our. It's like a nemesis topic. It's kind of like the "I'm not a threat" SMB. I'm not under attack. We think that way about data right now. It's like the next thing. An interesting number that I came across in the last few months doing research on this is we now have 200 zettabytes of data out in the world today. And a zettabyte is a trillion gigabytes. So it's a lot of data. Half of that is in the cloud, half of that is on premise. So we have a lot of data in that cloud. We have a real challenge with that information because a lot of times we sign those SaaS agreements either with Microsoft 365, Salesforce, QuickBooks, whatever that application is online, and it solves our problem. But we don't dig a little deeper to say, how are they protecting our data? What's the recovery time? How are they using it? Is AI involved? There's lots of questions that we don't ask. And one of those is, what's my responsibility in this, right? I'm sure you've had that same question come up.
Yeah, and even if it is, backed up, which I feel like some of the bigger organizations do, but you shouldn't trust that by itself, and you should back up your data. And Microsoft even says, they're not liable for lost data, but you have these credential harvesting hacks, right? And so, if you get the right credentials, you can literally, download or export, PII or financial information or customer information all day long, right?
Yeah, when we think about that shared responsibility matrix, specifically from Microsoft, they will copy the data. But backups are different. If we want history, if we want multiple versions of that, we really have to go put that under our control to make sure that's protected. And a lot of times we don't think about that for all of those SaaS applications that we sign up for on a weekly or monthly basis.
Yeah, and you have to air gap them. You have to make them immutable, which means not able to overwrite. I mean, there's just different things that the small and medium-sized business owner may or may not think of, or their internal IT may just be overloaded and just aren't getting to it. And that's one of the things we notice with folks that have internal teams when they're on the smaller side, that 9.9 times out of 10, they're working their back ends off. And they're not necessarily security experts. They know a lot about it, but they're not 100% focused on that component. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah. So on that note, though, you are an expert in this area. Have you seen any, interesting trends of late? What are the threat actors up to lately? What are you seeing out there?
When we look at some of the attacks, right, and I kind of mentioned that increase in, Microsoft specific attacks, but we're starting to see some other trends happening, like the global cost of cybercrime has reached $10.5 trillion, right? If we look at that in country terms, it'd be the third largest gross domestic product behind the US and China. This is significantly impactful, not just to nations, but to large business, small business, individual operators, and even the teams and clients underneath it. We see the dwell time, and when we talk about that term a lot, not everybody is familiar with it, but it's just how long a bad actor is in an environment before they're detected. That's hitting 24 days on average, 205 days on a maximum. So we know these bad actors are in our environments for a decent amount of time before discovery. And I'm sure right? That's a real challenge because of all they can do in that time frame.
Yeah, they're taking their time. If they get in, they're trying to move around laterally, horizontally, vertically. I mean, they're going to maximize the ROI of that event. And if there's any PII, further credential harvesting, right? Because so many browsers store information for some period of time that it's getting hashed, which means it's temporarily stored. They're patiently waiting, and like you said, anywhere from a month to like 3/4 of a year, they're in there, and it's scary.
It really makes you think about your retention on your backups. How long do I need to keep data to make sure it's safe? Maybe we don't necessarily need 7 years, but when we know that range of 24 to 200 days, protecting around that can be very important for a lot of organizations, depending on the type of data you have.
True. Yeah, I mean, you might have we have information that's probably over 7 years old, but like we'll put it on, sort of glacier storage, even if it takes 2 days to retrieve it, because there's almost 100% chance we won't need it, but it's there, right? In case there's maybe an audit or, some matter that requires it. So yeah, like you said, there's different levels of data, and as it ages, it typically does become less critical, but for sure, for a few years is extremely critical.
Yeah, but your question was, how do bad actors, or what are they doing today? And I kind of went off on a little bit about the back. We're
That's good.
Seeing them obviously leveraging AI and social engineering. We talked about that a little bit early on. And a lot of people don't understand what this means. How are they using these solutions to improve attacks? Well, we won't go super deep into this, but one of the things we want to understand is a lot of times when we talk about who who are these bad actors? People think it's, somebody sitting in a hoodie in a basement, banging away on a keyboard, trying to attack, like you said, a person. We know these are complex organizations, they're businesses, a lot of times sponsored by nation states. They have HR departments, recruiting firms, bonus structures. They are very, very good at what they do. And they build a lot of efficiency through automation and artificial intelligence to help evade the security solutions you have, or dig that social engineering from the World Wide Web altogether. The massive amounts of information they pull in, how they can leverage that to create those super crafty attacks. It's just kind of continuing to grow, if that makes sense.
Yes, 100%. And AI is going to make it even more trickier, with deep fakes and things like that, where, things like this, right? People can take your video, my video, and throw it into AI, and then they can do a Zoom call and control, our image, our likeness. And there's already been a case on that in Japan, where somebody was taken for a significant amount of money. So yeah, lots of advice, and this is that security component that I keep talking about, where you got to make sure you have qualified people on your team. And on your team doesn't necessarily mean like on your physical payroll. It could be like an outsourced situation as well.
Oh, super important, being an expert anymore. And this is the interesting thing, Scott, I think when we both got into security, you probably had a couple of different tools you used to manage the environment. And then you were maybe a Windows engineer or way back a network engineer, something like that. Today, there are so many things that an individual IT person would need to know to completely protect an environment. You mentioned like immutable storage, all the way down to patching and vulnerability management.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I was a Microsoft certified engineer, and back then, antivirus was all you needed. So today, that is far from the case. In fact, let's maybe unpack that a little bit. So, when we spoke before, we talked about how there's no silver bullet. There's no one thing, right? It requires layers of security, and each layer is designed to prevent, but minimize the risk that you are exposed to. So what are some of the simplest ways to protect, let's say, a small and medium, where would you start I know that topic alone could take probably a few hours, but there's probably a few basics that you would recommend.
Yeah, you hit that stack, and talking about how we layer. We talk about outside protection, inside protection, and recovery often. We also talk about people, process, and technology. So we're always throwing different terms out to describe how we protect an organization. Because when I start mentioning technology, I also want to say, but we have to have process behind it, and we have to have people behind it. Otherwise, that technology decays. We don't know how to respond to what it's telling us, and it may miss something. So I'll always say people, process, and technology, but then I'll talk about the technology. So, you were perfect to say there was no silver bullet. But if I'm going to defend for a minimal or simple solution, I'm going to say I need to protect the endpoint, because that's where a lot of attacks start. I need to protect the user's access, because without that, anybody could get in with username and password, and then I have to be able to recover. So I'm going to look at solutions like endpoint detection and response. There's a lot of terms. You mentioned antivirus. That's the older version of this, right? That we all used to use a long time ago. Now, endpoint detection and response, or a managed version of that, managed detection and response, to help defend attacks, both signature-based and unknown at the PC. Multi-factor authentication, making sure I always have to verify who I am. I'm sure you see this. This is such a common occurrence when we hear of a breach that someone just had a username and password.
Yeah, and the thing about MFA, multi-factor authentication, to me, is the number of times where I will talk to a client, and I ask them. I said, when you're logging on to some of your daily sites that you interact with, do you ever get offered the ability to is this, are you traveling, or is this good for 30 days or 90 days? And they don't think with what they're doing. They think they're just answering a question like, yeah, this is my normal computer. It's a good, they just deactivated MFA. And it's like, so I have to keep reminding them that anything that remotely looks like, smells, tastes like, that it's going to make that go away. No. No, so I always say this is a public computer. No, don't deactivate it for 90 days. It just, you're just
Yeah.
literally taking away that security. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, you're hitting it perfectly, because there's so many little, we could dig into token theft and all these little things that can happen if you have that delay of the secondary authentication as you push that out.
Right.
But, step one is saying, well, we need to make sure we're validating who we are. And then I didn't touch on the third step. We have to be able to recover. We need a solid backup or BCDR or data protection solution that can restore data in the time frames that the business needs. Oftentimes, you mentioned immutability. We could have those backups solid and working, but find out the restoration is going to take 30 hours instead of 4 hours that the business needs. So lots of little requirements in there, but I'm going to say endpoint protection, multi-factor authentication, and backups is my kind of 3 minimum solutions. I want people to add more, don't get me wrong, but that's the simple side of it.
Yeah, prevent, detect, recover, right? It's
yes, yes.
It's perfect. So is there anything that you have come across that you see, the SMB, the small to medium-sized business, tend to maybe forget to include in their analysis as far as what they need to look at and make sure they're considering it for security, because it could be, let's say, an attack vector that they don't think with?
Really great question, because there's one area that is great for us, but also is this risk zone that we don't talk about. And that's IoT devices, or Internet of Things devices. We think about all these automation things that we buy and put in our home or put in our business to make our life easier, to tell us what's going on, from a smartwatch to a smart thermostat or even a building automation system. All of these things connect to the network. They have security, they could have data, and they can be a breach point. But we install them, we forget about them, and they become these vulnerabilities that we have to start thinking about, because we're buying so many of them and we're installing them everywhere. I'm sure you're seeing it everywhere you go.
Everywhere, yeah. From thermostats to Google devices, to Alexa devices, to Apple devices. They are all connected, and I love how they don't listen unless you say the exact magic word. And I'm not calling foul on that per se, but I know in my house, if I forget to turn the microphone off physically with a switch, we'll just be watching TV, and all of a sudden, the device wakes up and starts talking, and the magic words weren't spoken. So, you also have that invasion of privacy as well.
Yeah, we see a lot of attacks in this world. They just don't get as much attention. There was I won't mention the name of the company, but a large security camera hack that happened a few years ago, where bad actors took control of 150,000 cameras. These were in jails and schools and hospitals. These did capture private, sensitive information. And yes, this was a breach. This is a legitimate breach. But in most small businesses, we just don't think about them. So having a policy to say, how are we going to vet out to make sure this is a safe appliance to put on our network? How can we enforce that with technology? And how can we leverage tools to help find vulnerabilities on things we may have forgot about? That's kind of the 3 steps we typically take with IoT.
That's great. That there's actionable steps our audience can take, and they're very, very valid, folks. All right, so I need you to pull out your crystal ball now, because I can't even believe it, but 2025 is just ripping. And so with 2026 just on the horizon here, what do you see possibly, booming next year with threat actors?
A lot of it is if it isn't broke, they'll keep doing it, right? They won't fix it. We'll likely see a continuation of imitation attacks or trusted sender compromises, where these messages look legitimate. They come from real sources. They have current websites. They're weaponized after the fact. So we see email as continuing to be a large percentage of the starting point for incidents and breaches. We just, we need continually to improve that world, continually improve education. So we expect that to happen. What we see being new, especially in the second half, I'd say, of 2026, is more heavy SaaS-based attacks. So as bad actors start to lessen the amount of incidents and breaches that they're attaining from things like email and vulnerabilities that we're closing the loop on, they'll find other loopholes. We talked about the shared responsibility matrix and things like Microsoft 365 saying we have to do certain things to make sure it's secure and the data is recoverable. Most businesses don't do that. So it is an attack point, a potential opportunity for bad actors to get in those systems, compromise that data, and hold it for ransom or extortion. So we're going to see more SaaS-directed attacks versus the on-premise attacks that we've seen historically. That's at least my crystal ball and expectation.
I mean, you said half the world's data is up in the cloud already, so it's probably not going to become any less, So
yes.
I think that's 100% accurate. All right, let's close this thing out with maybe some thoughts on AI, because you've mentioned that a few times. This agentic AI concept is it's at its beginning stages right now. What are your thoughts on how a business should think about agentic AI?
Yeah, it's a really interesting step forward in the use of what we're calling artificial intelligence and machine language. How can we use this term very, very carefully, how can we augment or help current roles out? So when we think of highly repetitive activities, 24/7 support of something. So whether it's a chatbot feature or a sales feature or a marketing feature, when we think of agentic AI, the goal of that is to say, how can I complete roles, not just tasks? So we expect that to really grow in 2026 and beyond. And, as human workers, we'll shift our workload, we'll increase our output, we'll leverage these tools in new and creative ways as we go. But we'll see more and more businesses become highly competitive by leveraging these type of solutions to automate, a lot of repetitive tasks. We've been saying the same thing for a while. We're just getting more and more refined on what that means. If I can take a customer service role and turn that into an agentic response, we might be able to close or manage 50 to 60% of our incoming issues. And then we reserve our team to really give the white glove treatment to the balance of those. So lots of ways we can leverage that.
Yeah, and I know that there's so much fear about AI, like replacing humans, is on the table and being discussed, and I'm sure it's very valid and fair to discuss that. But I mean, society's gone through this over and over, right? I mean, from mechanizing and manufacturing to the internet, the World Wide Web is going to put everybody out of work, and then Amazon was going to put everybody out of work. No, they've created just tremendous volumes of opportunities, right? Any comments on that?
Oh, I look at probably the old man of me looks at it like 50 years ago, we couldn't have done this, right? We would have had to find a way to make this work. And it's still providing excellent content and information for people. Again, we're just speeding up our capacity to consume and deliver services. So this is just going to continue that process. We just have to be aware of it, understand that we could be exposing something in our environment that could create risks, and then find ways to close those gaps if we see them.
Yeah. Oh, and there's a learning curve. We're still in the wild, wild west for sure. And there's no regulations, and, and businesses probably aren't as organized about having policies and processes in place about what you can and can't upload, when you're working with AI, and all that's going to definitely be exposed over the course of the next probably 12 to 24 months, right? We'll be reading some things on that, but good points on that. Look, is there any closing thoughts or advice you might have for some of our audience members that are business owners on leveraging technology, cybersecurity, to try to be a little bit more competitive in today's already highly competitive environment?
Yeah, I'm going to take it down to one fundamental step that business owners, we used to do this a lot and we've kind of got out of the habit of it. And that's what we call a network assessment. Now, I know in my days of doing network assessments, I would go in and I would always find something that the business didn't realize was there. Today, that's just growing. And those are the vulnerabilities that we want to help defend from attack and protect them. So some sort of recurring, whether it's annual, quarterly, I think kind of dependent on a lot of things for that business on how frequent that happens. But
Right.
make sure we're really digging in, not just to find the PCs and switches and servers on a network, but those other things, those things that we may have hired a vendor for to manage our HVAC system or our security system, and they've plugged in. So there's all these things that we want to be aware of. And it's just, we need a recurring process to find them so they don't become a vulnerability.
You say process? Yes. Uh, the thing is, when I speak to clients, I try to explain to them that their infrastructure is a living and breathing thing, and they don't realize that, like, literally every day it's changing, right? So an employee might get just an update to an existing piece of technology that they're using, right? It's already authorized, it's there, but there's an update, and then that update there might be something that isn't quite up to snuff when it comes to the process you talked about before, and checking things out. But since it is a living and breathing, you add a printer, you switch, you add an employee, right? Just that device is a new attack vector, and so you need to keep that vulnerability, those vulnerability scans on some sort of routine, like depending on if they have any compliance issues or what industry they're in, right?
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better. That was perfect.
Awesome, Jim. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. And I hope we can do another one maybe next season, and great conversation. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I appreciate it. It's great talking to you. And from your side too, this was a fun conversation. I appreciate it.
What a great conversation. Huge thanks to Jim Peterson for joining us today. Now, if this episode got you thinking about your own security posture, then now's the time to act. So at One Step Secure IT, we offer a complimentary level 1 vulnerability assessment as a gift to our audience. Now, it will provide you with a clear picture of what your risks really are and what you need to do next. So just head on over to onestepsecurit.com and you can get more information on that. So thanks again for tuning in today. And if you haven't already done so, go ahead and get caught up on our earlier episodes, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of this important information. So until next time, stay informed, stay secure, and we'll see you next time on One Step Beyond Cyber.